Back in 1970, America's open roads were alive with a sound you never forgot, the scream of high-revving motorcycles tearing across the desert and city streets. These bikes weren't quiet, polite, or ordinary. They were bold, fast, and unapologetic, built to turn heads and make hearts race. For riders, they meant freedom, rebellion, and pure adrenaline on two wheels. We'll see how these machines created a sound that defined a generation. So make sure you stay with us to the end. The year 1970 marked a turning point in motorcycle history that we felt in our bones before we understood it in our heads. This was when the Japanese manufacturers, Honda, Kawasaki, Yamaha, and Suzuki, declared war on the established order, and their weapons were machines that could outrun anything on four wheels. The Honda CB750, introduced just a year earlier, had shown the world what was possible, but by 1970 the gloves were off and the real screaming began. The CB750's inline-4 engine wasn't just revolutionary because of its power, though 67 horsepower was mind-blowing for a production bike. It was revolutionary because of its sound. When you twisted that throttle, 4 cylinders sang in perfect harmony, building to a crescendo that could be heard for miles. We remember the first time we heard one wind up through the gears, that mechanical symphony that started as a rumble and climbed to an almost musical wail. It was the sound of the future arriving at 120 miles per hour. But Honda wasn't alone in this revolution. By 1970, every major manufacturer was chasing that perfect scream. The Kawasaki H1 Mark III arrived like a two-stroke rocket, its 500 cubic centimeter triple engine producing a sound that was part banshee, part chainsaw, and all business. This wasn't the refined note of Honda's four-cylinder. This was raw, primal power that announced itself with a snarl and departed with a howl that echoed off canyon walls long after the bike had disappeared. These machines changed everything about how we thought about motorcycles. Our fathers' bikes were dependable workhorses, but these new superbikes were thoroughbreds bred for speed. The learning curve was steep, but for those of us who mastered these screaming machines, the payoff was pure exhilaration. We weren't just riding, we were conducting an orchestra of controlled explosions, and every ride was a performance that left us breathless and craving more. Before we dive into these wild machines, if you're a motorcycle fan and haven't subscribed yet, you're missing out. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss our next ride. We're about to take a journey back to when motorcycles had souls that screamed. If four-stroke engines were the refined gentlemen of the motorcycle world, then two-strokes were the wild cowboys, louder, nastier, and absolutely unforgettable. The year 1970 brought us some of the most iconic two-stroke screamers ever built. Machines that didn't just make noise, they made statements. The Kawasaki H1 Mark III we mentioned earlier was just the beginning of a two-stroke revolution that would define the sound of speed for an entire generation. That Mark III wasn't just fast. With its 60 horsepower pushing only 400 pounds, it was lethal. Two-stroke engines fired twice as often as four-strokes, creating a staccato beat that builds to a frenzied crescendo. When you opened up a Mach 3, it didn't just accelerate, it launched itself forward with a sound like tearing fabric, if that fabric was made of thunder and lightning. The exhaust note was sharp, urgent, almost angry, as if the machine was as eager to go fast as we were. Then came Yamaha with their RD series, and Suzuki with their T500. These weren't just motorcycles, they were mobile symphonies of two-stroke music. The Yamaha RD350, when it arrived in the early 70s, produced a sound that was pure motorcycle poetry, a rising and falling wail that spoke directly to something primal in our hearts. We remember riding through small towns on these machines, and the sound bouncing off buildings would turn heads for blocks. Kids would stop playing and stare, knowing they were witnessing something special. The beauty of two-stroke sound wasn't just in its volume. Though these bikes could wake the dead, it was in its character. Unlike the smooth, predictable note of a four-stroke, two-strokes had personality. They popped and crackled on deceleration, sending blue smoke signals that announced your arrival long before you came into view. The smell was distinctive too. That sweet mixture of burning two-stroke oil and race gas that clung to your clothes and stayed in your memory. These two-stroke terrors taught us that sometimes the most thrilling experiences come with a price. They were temperamental, demanding the right mixture of oil and gas, the perfect carburetor adjustment, and a rider who understood their moods. But when everything was just right, when the stars aligned and the mixture was perfect, these machines would sing a song of pure speed that made all the maintenance and fuss worthwhile. They were high-maintenance lovers, but the passion they delivered was worth every moment of frustration. While the Japanese were perfecting their screaming symphonies, American manufacturers were crafting their own brand of thunder. The year 1970 found Harley-Davidson in transition, still building their legendary shovelhead engines while adapting to a changing world. But make no mistake, when it came to the sound of power, nobody did it quite like the Americans. Our bikes didn't scream, they roared with the voice of American thunder. The Harley-Davidson shovelhead, introduced in 1966 but perfected by 1970, produced a sound that was pure America. When you rolled on the throttle of a 70 shovelhead, the sound didn't rise to a scream. It built to a roar that seemed to come from the earth itself. The long-stroke V-twin configuration created a rhythm that matched the human heartbeat, making these machines feel less like vehicles and more like extensions of our own bodies. The beauty of American motorcycle sound in 1970 wasn't just in the engines, it was in the entire experience. The straight pipes that many of us fitted to our Harleys didn't just amplify the sound, they transformed it into something that could shake windows and stir souls. Riding through a tunnel on a properly tuned shovelhead with straight pipes was a religious experience, the sound waves bouncing off concrete walls and enveloping us in a cocoon of mechanical music. Indian, though struggling as a manufacturer by 1970, had left us with a legacy of their own unique thunder. The surviving Indians from the late 60s and early 70s carried the torch of American V-twin sound with their own distinctive note. Where Harleys rumbled with authority, Indians seemed to growl with barely contained wildness. The sound was similar but distinctly different, like comparing the roar of a grizzly bear to the growl of a mountain lion. These American machines taught us that speed isn't everything. While the Japanese bikes could outrun our Harleys and Indians on the straightaway, there was something about the American sound that went deeper than mere performance numbers. It was the sound of rebellion, of individuality, of refusing to conform to what the world expected from us. When we fired up our American Iron, we weren't just starting an engine. We were making a statement about who we were and what we valued. That sound became part of our identity, as much a part of us as our own voices. By 1970, something beautiful was happening in garages and backyard shops across America. We weren't just riding motorcycles anymore. We were creating them. The custom culture that would define motorcycle enthusiasm for decades was born from our desire to make these screaming machines uniquely our own. This wasn't just about performance, it was about expressing our personalities through chrome, paint, and most importantly, sound. The chopper movement was in full swing by 1970, and with it came a whole new approach to motorcycle sound. Taking a stock Harley and extending the front end wasn't just about looks, it changed the entire character of the bike, including how it sounded. Longer frames seemed to amplify the V-twin rumble, while straight pipes and custom exhaust systems turned every ride into a rolling concert. We remember the first time we heard a properly built chopper fire up. The Japanese bikes, with their high-revving engines, lent themselves to completely different sonic modifications than the American V-twins. A Honda CB750 with a 4-into-1 exhaust system could produce a sound that was almost musical in its precision. A rising and falling note that climbed through the RPM range like a trained soprano hitting high notes. Meanwhile, Kawasaki triples with expansion chamber exhausts created a sound that was part motorcycle, part rocket ship. The culture around custom sound wasn't just about being loud, though we certainly achieved that. It was about creating a signature that was uniquely yours. Every serious rider knew the sound of his own bike and could pick it out from a lineup of similar machines. We developed an ear for the subtle differences. The slight irregularity in a Harley's idle that meant the carb needed adjustment, the whistle in a two-strokes exhaust note that indicated a loose baffle, the change in pitch that warned of an impending mechanical issue. This was also the era when we learned that sound could be both beautiful and functional. Those expansion chambers on the two-stroke bikes weren't just for show. They were carefully tuned instruments that used sound waves to improve engine performance. The length and diameter of the pipes affected how the exhaust pulses bounced back to the engine. We were literally tuning our motorcycles like musical instruments, adjusting the pitch and tone to extract maximum performance while creating the perfect mechanical symphony. The racetracks of 1970 were where these screaming machines truly found their voices. Whether it was drag racing at Lyons or road racing at Daytona, the sound of competition-tuned motorcycles at full song was something that penetrated not just our ears, but our very souls. This was where we learned that there's a difference between fast and race fast, between loud and race loud. Drag racing gave us some of the most intense motorcycle sounds ever created. A top-fuel motorcycle at full throttle didn't just make noise, it created a sonic assault that you felt as much as heard. But it wasn't just the dragsters. Even the modified street bikes running in the lower classes produced sounds that were unlike anything heard on public roads. The quarter mile taught us about the sound of pure acceleration. A properly tuned Kawasaki H1 launching off the line created a sound that was part mechanical scream, part banshee wail. The two-stroke triple would climb through the rev range in what seemed like seconds, the exhaust note rising from a snarl to a shriek as the bike rocketed toward the finish line. Meanwhile, the big Harleys and modified American V-twins provided the bass notes in this mechanical orchestra, their thunderous rumble creating a counterpoint to the higher-pitched scream of the multi-cylinder bikes. Road racing offered a different kind of sonic experience, the sound of sustained speed rather than explosive acceleration. At places like Daytona and Talladega, we could hear the racing machines long before we could see them. The sound would build gradually, a distant buzz that grew to a roar as the pack approached, then exploded into a full-throated mechanical symphony as they flashed past our position. Each bike had its own voice in the chorus, the Honda 4s singing their smooth, high-pitched song, the Kawasaki triples adding their staccato beat, the occasional Ducati providing an irregular but musical counterpoint. The bikes that sounded the most impressive weren't always the fastest, but they were invariably the ones that captured our imagination. We learned to read a race by sound alone, the change in engine note that indicated a shift, the slight irregularity that warned of mechanical trouble, the subtle differences that separated the leaders from the also-rans. Racing gave these screaming machines a voice that spoke directly to our competitive spirits and our love of mechanical perfection. If this is bringing back memories of your first American V-twin, or if you're learning about these legendary machines for the first time, join our brotherhood by hitting that subscribe button and bell. We ride down memory lane every week, and you don't want to miss the journey. Taking these screaming machines out on America's highways was where we truly appreciated their voices. The open road provided the perfect acoustic environment for these mechanical symphonies, and by 1970, we had the bikes and the highways to create some unforgettable musical experiences. The interstate highway system was mature enough to provide long, sweeping stretches where these machines could truly sing, and we were more than happy to conduct the orchestra. Interstate riding on a 1970 superbike was a revelation in sound. The steady drone of highway cruising was punctuated by moments of pure acoustic bliss when we opened the throttle to pass slower traffic. A Honda CB 750 at 70 miles per hour would settle into a smooth, almost meditative hum, but twist that throttle and suddenly you were conducting a four-cylinder symphony that climbed through the musical scale as the speedometer needle swept toward triple digits. The sound would bounce off overpasses and guard rails, creating echoes that seemed to follow us down the highway. The two-stroke bikes created their own unique highway soundscape. A Kawasaki H1 at cruising speed produced a distinctive bark, bark, bark rhythm that was unmistakably two-stroke. But when the need for speed arose, that bark would transform into a full-throated howl that could be heard for miles. We remember riding in groups where the different engine configurations would create complex harmonies, the smooth note of the four strokes blending with the urgent staccato of the two strokes and the deep rumble of the American V-twins. Mountain passes provided the most dramatic acoustic experiences. The sound of a properly tuned motorcycle engine echoing off canyon walls was something that stayed with you forever. Whether it was the Angeles Crest Highway in California, the Tail of the Dragon in Tennessee, or any of the countless mountain roads that crisscrossed our continent, these natural amphitheaters amplified and enhanced the sounds of our machines in ways that no concert hall could match. The highway also taught us about the social aspect of motorcycle sound. We could communicate with other riders through our exhausts, or the distinctive sound pattern that identified us to friends before they could see us. Our motorcycles became extensions of our personalities, and their voices were as recognizable to our riding companions as our own speaking voices. The screaming motorcycles of 1970 didn't just change transportation, they changed us. These machines became the soundtrack to a cultural revolution, their voices providing the background music for a generation that was redefining what it meant to be free in America. The impact went far beyond the motorcycle community. These sounds became part of the American cultural landscape, as recognizable and meaningful as rock and roll or the roar of a V8 muscle car. Films like Easy Rider had introduced the world to the sound of American motorcycles, but by 1970, the full range of motorcycle voices was being celebrated in popular culture, while the rumble of a Harley represented individuality and non-conformity. This was also the era when motorcycle sound began to influence other aspects of American culture. The automotive industry took notice of what motorcycle manufacturers were doing with exhaust tuning and began applying similar principles to cars. The clean, precise note of a well-tuned motorcycle engine became a benchmark for acoustic engineering across multiple industries. We were inadvertently teaching America what mechanical music could sound like when it was done right. The social impact was equally profound. These screaming machines broke down barriers and created connections between people who might never have spoken otherwise. A shared appreciation for the sound of a well-tuned engine could bridge gaps of age, race, and social class. The motorcycle became a universal language, and its voice was understood by anyone who had ever felt the call of the open road. We built a brotherhood based not just on shared experiences, but on shared sounds that spoke to something fundamental in the human spirit. Fellow riders, after riding through the history of these amazing machines, one thing is clear. The screaming motorcycles of 1970 weren't just thrilling, they were alive. Their sound spoke to our spirits, their power matched our dreams, and every ride felt like freedom itself. These weren't just bikes, they were the heartbeat of the open road. If you enjoyed this trip back to the 70s, hit subscribe and tell us which one was your favorite in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories. More stories, more bikes, more freedom on two wheels awaiting. Until next time, keep the shiny side up and the throttle open.